Okay, welcome to Voice of San Diego at Home, sort of mashup with Voice of San Diego at Home and the Voice of San Diego podcast. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm here with Andrew Keats and Sarah Libby, and a special guest, City Council President Georgette Gómez. San Diego City Council President Georgette Gómez has joined us to take a lot of your questions and to talk to us about the budget that was passed this week from the City of San Diego and the City Council. We've got a lot of questions that have already come in. First of all, thank you for taking the time. You are also running for Congress. You've had quite a few weeks. You're dealing with a massive deficit, civil unrest, a lot of concerns. Is there any?
There's a pandemic also.
There's also the pandemic has happened. I don't know if you've heard about that. Pretty big time. Anything you want to start with just before we start getting into some of these questions about all these crises?
Yeah, that's a loaded question right there. I have to say 2020 is becoming quite an interesting year for me. It's definitely challenging my leadership to the max. I don't think I've ever experienced what we're going through right now at a personal level, as you laid out the pandemic. Before the pandemic, I was wrapping up the primary congressional. I thought I was going to have a little bit of time to kind of reground myself and start 2020. But soon after, the pandemic exploded and needed to focus on that. And then we needed to bring home the biggest deal that we have ever seen, at least through my time, San Diego State. So that also took some attention that I needed to focus on. And then the situation that we're dealing right now in terms of the issues related to our African American community, but also just overall our underserved communities is something that I've been working towards my entire life and really reshifting. So there's a lot that has been going on in my life, and within all of that, running for Congress. So you can see that I've been a bit busy.
Yeah, I almost forgot the largest and most complex land use deal in the city of San Diego's history. Just that happened.
Is that the only time in your life you've ever forgotten the stadium deal, Scott?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yes.
All right, let's get into this right away. This week, the city of San Diego passed its budget. We just talked about that on the podcast version about how that all works. Basically, the city has to project how much money it thinks it will get for the next year, and then allocate how much the city staff can spend out of that for what purposes. One of the things that came up right after this was a very strong frustration with the lack of response or lack of taking the response from the community about defunding the police. Will Rodriguez Kennedy, the chair of the Democratic Party in the city of San Diego, in the region, he said, quote, "The system is rigged against reform movements in context." He said he was extremely disappointed. He said the strong mayor system without a strong council is basically a city level dictatorship. It was some pretty harsh words for how that went. Do you feel like the mayor acted as a dictator and you were sort of a victim of this process?
No, I wouldn't characterize it in such way. I mean, I definitely think there's something to say about the strong mayor, strong council form of government. I'm still trying to figure out what the strong council component is, and I've been fighting really hard as soon as I became the council president to really elevate that. I've been pushing on my colleagues to really focus on policy. I mean, we are the policy arm of government, and so we really need to drive that, and definitely something that I've been pushing hard on, making sure that we're doing that. But in terms of the budget, I mean, the budget is a really critical document that we take a lot of time in developing it. We started the budget conversations on April 30th. That led to us looking at every single department, right? And you gotta remember, this particular budget was different than any other budget because normally we get the breakdown of every single department line by line. That didn't happen this time around because it was created under the circumstances of the pandemic. So we had less resources available to us in a shorter time, most challenging budget ever. The problem in relation to the strong mayor form of government is in order for the council to push back, you need to have a strong council to be able to push that on that. And that's not quite what we have right now. I mean, we could have had the conversation about defunding the PD if need be. And trust me, I was looking into it. I checked in with some of my colleagues, but there wasn't really a true path. Now, what the outcome of all of that is that I am looking at it. I requested, just like Councilmember Montgomery has requested of the IBA, is to give us a little bit of a stronger analysis to bring back a conversation of what that could look like. Removing funding from any department has an outcome, and we have to understand what that is. So just I know that a lot of people called in the day of and the week before, but we couldn't, even though if we wanted to remove 100 million or 50 million or a million from the budget, we need to understand where is it coming from and how that impacts the totality of the work that they do, and are we okay with that? That's a conversation that we haven't had whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, sorry, Scott. So you put out a budget memo at the start of this process outlining your priorities. You've done that in recent years. That's never included, from you or anyone else on the council, it's never included a call to explore spending less on police, like that as a goal. So I guess there's a part of the response to the council's decision on Monday I'd characterize as people saying that maybe some on the council wanted to join this movement to cut $100 million, or they would have if only that they had had the votes, or that there was some strategic decision that they decided not to. But I guess what's not at all clear to me is that that's actually a priority that you share. So do you believe that cutting spending on SDPD is a priority? Is that something that should be a goal of the city council if it were able to have the votes to make it happen?
I think that the goal of this whole conversation is reforming. And I've been calling for that since day one. And every single, with the exception of my last budget my last budget memo, but every single budget I make reference to restructuring how we're spending PD money, how we're hiring future PD officers. They should come from our community. And that trickles down to what is the criteria of us hiring people that we need to reevaluate. The type of training that they have. I've been calling for restructuring since the beginning. So I think that really is a conversation that we need to have. Does that lead to less money? That's a possibility. But we need to look at it. Like I said, I mean, my focus this budget was restructuring how we're doing outreach to our unsheltered population. Right now, a majority of it is being funded through the neighborhood policing. I actually called out for us to remove some of the money from neighborhood policing to restructure it to a different program. We were able to get that, but it didn't come from neighborhood policing. It came from a different pot of money. But now we're starting to move a little bit on that form of outreach. So I've been doing some of that. So this whole conversation about defunding, I think it's something that we should look at and really try to figure out what type of department do we need and how much staffing do we need and what type of focus should they been having. We constantly talk about community policing. We don't really have a structure of what that is and what's needed to be able to do that. So we have a lot of things that are kind of philosophical, but we're not intentionally creating a department that is that. And I think right now the conversation and the call for defunding, I think it comes from a place of anger. It comes up from a place of having a systemic racist system, and we have to call it for what it is. And we need to change that. So my commitment is not only just about the police. It's about making sure that government is working for all our communities, and that's been the drumbeat that I've been calling for since day one when I got to council, and I will continue to do so.
One of the main thrust of the increase to the police department's budget, as we discussed earlier on the podcast, is the raises and the benefit enhancements for the police. officers. We had a question come in here along those lines. Why won't you acknowledge the budget gives the police a raise, which is the opposite of defunding? Do you want to address that? Do you feel like you agree with the sort of assumption we've had for many years that the police are underpaid and that they need to see more increases like this in order to increase the quality and availability of recruits?
Well, I definitely know that we have plenty of evidence that we weren't keeping up with the pay. And I think the last, I forget when we voted to upgrade that contract, right? To really readjust the salaries, which I think it's a good thing. Now, the other piece that needs to happen within all of that we haven't done is really looking at the criteria in which we're bringing people on board. And I am a strong proponent that we need to start hiring people from our communities to ensure that there's a better relationship, that there's a better interaction. When we're bringing people that are not from the community, the reaction is what we're getting right now. And the engagement is what we're getting right now. So that really needs to couple with pay raises as well and accountability, which is something that we haven't really we haven't been able to get to that level of readjustment to our PD.
This isn't directly related to the budget, but you mentioned different reforms have been your priorities over the years. One thing I've noticed in having, reported on police issues for several years is kind of a trend. A few years ago, for instance, Shelley Zimmerman, who was the police chief at the time, talked to the council about allowing legal pot dispensaries in the city, and she tossed out a bunch of statistics about how dangerous that would be. And no one on the council really pressed her on those statistics or followed up on them. When the council discussed smart streetlights, it didn't come out publicly that the police would have access to those streetlights. Some members of the council told us they didn't even know that was the case. We also reported recently that the police department told the council it implemented a bunch of reforms recommended by the Justice Department, and we didn't see any follow-up or questioning from the council on that. Do you feel like the council is doing all it can to be, aggressive and effective as sort of a check on the police or as an oversight group?
Yeah, I mean that a lot of those conversations at times do come to the neighborhood policing, to the livable neighborhoods and public safety committee. That's where the conversations need to occur. This goes back to the beginning question. This form of government that we have, there's only so much, and we're trying to figure out how do we legislate PD, right? Oversight. But at the end of the day, it's how that legislation gets implemented. And the council doesn't have a role in implementation. It is the mayor. We can express our opinions on the implementation side of things. We can express our disagreement and push on other ways. But at the end of the day, the follow-up and how that gets implemented is under the mayor's jurisdiction. And we have very little role within all of that. So that really is a lot of the frustration that I'm encountering in terms of the engagement of really creating a true, transparent, and accountable police department in the relationship of what it means between the council and the mayor.
I wanted to ask, let me just do one thing real quick. So there was a couple questions that have come in so far about the amount of public comment at the council hearing. Hours and hours of frustration of people asking about this decision. And I think here, Lydia S. Martinez puts it, you should, it felt like it wasn't really acknowledged, that there wasn't an opportunity taken, as she says, to say that their demands were seriously considered and debated, but did not make sense to go that route right now. Was there a missed opportunity in that forum to explain and address why we were at that stage of the budget? You heard them. Here's how to understand how things work a little bit better, and here's what we're going to do in the future did you miss an opportunity to do that?
Perhaps. I mean, maybe we should have engaged differently and explained where we were in the day of what it looked like. Yeah, but I don't think that that would have changed how people felt. I think people were really wanting to us do what they were asking us to do. The fact that that didn't happen, I don't think it would have mattered how we would have engaged. I think that message was not getting through just because the action didn't happen. So could I manage, or even any council member, could they have engaged differently? Yeah, we could have, but I also don't think it would have made any difference. Just because there's just that sentiment of anger, of frustration, of not really believing in government. And I think when you're at that level, how do you have a productive conversation? So for me, my intention is I needed to create that space to let people vocalize their comments. I fought really hard in making that happen. Normally, we have other council presidents that would have managed the situation completely different, and I definitely was hearing from folks that they would have liked to have a shorter hearing, or have it me control it more, and I just didn't want to do that, because I think it's important to let people express their opinions, as frustrated as they feel. I think that is, there's some validation to that. Um, so we're working. So I just don't know if it would have changed the narrative afterwards or during. I think people were really wanting us to do what they were asking us to do the day of, and it's just something that there's a lot to it. And I'm hoping that we can have that conversation today to really express what that is, and why that couldn't happen then, the day of.
Council President, the conversation around police reform and criminal justice in San Diego is moving very fast. It has been a major topic in the city and at Voice of San Diego for years, but the change that we've seen just in the last 2 weeks is probably more than we saw in the 2 years previous to that.
Mm-hmm.
And something like defund the police, as I started with before, wasn't even on the table, and now here we are talking about it. And so I've had to play catch up and try to understand specifically what the calls for defunding the police are at their root. And I would say the most basic and the least controversial interpretation is a request to reimagine what we need a police force to do, and how many jobs we are currently asking the police to do that are not in the core group of things that we need somebody who is armed and has the ability to arrest you to do. And so as you worked through the department's nearly 2,000 employees, you might get to some really difficult calls around whether we want police to do that or what we don't. But there would probably be, I imagine, some low-hanging fruit, some thoughts that maybe reasonable people could agree aren't the best roles for police officers. Mm-hmm. And I thought one really interesting outcome on the budget was that the mayor's budget, his initial proposal, included ending the police department funding for the Star Pal program. This is the Police Athletic League. It's like a community outreach after-school program, police officers working with sports and mentoring with at-risk youth. Serves about 3,000 at-risk youth. And it's an independent nonprofit, but they have 7 employees at that independent nonprofit who are SDPD members of the San Diego Police Department. 6 of them are sworn officers, about $1.5 million. The council actually proposed adding that back into the budget, to take that $1.5 million and spend it to continue funding that program with police officers as employees of the city, working with youth. I wonder if there was an ideological commitment to the defund the police movement and a belief that it's time to reimagine who should be doing certain jobs and whether police are the right folks. It seems to me that the Star Pal program might have been a good place to have that conversation. And yet the city council, not the mayor, the city council decided that that was a priority. Again, I want to stress that this is a program that serves at-risk youth. I've not heard anyone complain about the program or say that the program is bad in any way. But if you're committed to the idea of defunding the police, why not spend that $1.5 million through the Parks and Rec Department instead of through the San Diego Police Department?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I don't know if the Start Pal program is the place to start cutting, or restructuring it, right, in terms of where it should be housed, and who should be running that program. Mind you, the reason and the rationale behind the START program and trying to restore it is because it is a good program that is doing good things for the community. So is that worth investing? There's a good argument to say yes. It's got positive outcomes. So why cut something that is positive? Can we do more with that amount of money if we were to really rethink it and reimagine it? That's a possibility, but we haven't had that opportunity to really have those conversations. And am I a supporter of reimagining how we do policing and the structure of all of that? Yes, I am 100% behind it. I've been pushing for that since day one, to that extent that I'm a firm believer that public safety should have that there should be a different understanding of what that is in our communities. I've been saying to the council that public safety can be completely different if we were to look at it from that perspective. Is how we design communities. It's what we allow to be built in communities. It's about really investing in the community groups that are wanting to do good things for their community, and what that looks like. It's not just PD focus, but we haven't had those conversations at all at the city hall ever. I think this is the first time that we're acknowledging that we need to re-envision, and I don't think and I just to be truthful, I don't think everybody is in that same wavelength. But I do think that there is an opportunity to push. I do believe that there is an opportunity to look at the current PD structure with a closer lens and really start re-envisioning what that looks like. But that also includes the community being part of that, because I tell you, one move has a domino effect. And I'm not saying that to be cautious, but we need to be mindful of that and what that is, and be aware that if we move one thing, this is what it means to the community. And that's not saying anything positive or negative, but we need to be more intentional about this conversation. It just doesn't happen over 10 hours of public hearing. We really have to look at it for what it is and really start having those conversations, which I'm hoping that we will have.
There were two things in the budget that were new, even despite a budget deficit. Well, there's a few things that were new, but two that really stood out. One is the Office of Race and Equity. This was proposed by Councilwoman Monica Montgomery and almost immediately endorsed by the mayor and got into the budget. It will, as you put it, confront systemic racial inequities. What exactly would it do? What are those employees and the city going to do in that office? Right.
So there's a lot. I mean, that to me is a very exciting commitment that we were able to get and to really start. What is the intention behind it? The intention behind it is really to and this is where, I mean, I think Monica and myself, Councilmember Montgomery and myself, are trying to state to people, look, our commitment to social equity is in our core. It's who we are as people. You can look at our track records and it's there, and that has not changed. So the intention behind this department, this new office, is really to look at our system as a city, even outside of PD, and say, are we really making decisions from an equity lens, from a race related lens? And if we're not, let's start readjusting that. And I think the conversation about the budget is part of that. When we propose cuts, or when the mayor is starting to create the budget and he's proposing all these different cuts, are they being done from an equity lens? Are they being done from a racial lens? And I can say that honestly, every single year we have to start with the same fight, which is this time around we started by eliminating one of the libraries in my district, which is really critical. I never heard until I saw it on paper that was being proposed, so I had to fight to restore that closure. The library hours, I kept saying, does it make sense to make a straight out cut to every single library hour, or should we be looking at the libraries that need to keep open, because that's only the only place that our community members have the ability to go and have access to the resources that the library provides, versus a more affluent community that might not need it as much. So these are conversations that we need to have. We're constantly having a fight about making sure that we are spending equitably, north of the 8, south of the 8, in terms of road improvements. We're not quite there yet. We have a climate action plan that calls for equity. We're implementing it, but I have to say that the implementation is not being done through an equity lens. So the intention of this department and what we're envisioning is to really look at everything that we do from that lens. And if we're not achieving it, then we need to readjust. And that includes the PD, that includes how we spend the budget, that includes how our park and rec are efficient, our libraries are efficient, and everything that we do in terms of the operations of the city as a whole. And I think it's very significant, and it's a huge success that we were able to get it. It's just the beginning. I mean, there are other cities that have over 20 staffers on the department. Obviously, we're starting with 3. But race and equity is very critical in how we are creating our government. And I think what we're seeing right now on the streets, it's really a sentiment of we continue to not really address the racial issues that we have in this society. We're continuing to see the pressures that our brown and black communities have been facing over the decades, continuing to live below poverty, and that never changes. So that pressure is boiling, and there's an explosion of that. So the system that we all depend on has not been equitable, and it's not been equitable to people of color. So it is time that we start centering that conversation as we make decisions as a city government. And the intention of this department is to really look at it from that lens. And there's a lot of I'm excited because it's going to bring different lenses to the city. And I'm only hoping that the future council takes into account those changes that this office will call for, because it's very critical.
You mentioned earlier one of your big goals for the police department is hiring officers who come from the community. And that seems like a goal that would likely carry over to this new office as well, ensuring that city officials look like the makeup of the community that they're serving. But the city, like most agencies in the state, isn't allowed to take things like gender or race into account when it's making hiring decisions because of a state constitutional amendment. And Shirley Weber is leading an effort to put a measure on the ballot that would overturn that, essentially a ban on affirmative action. Is that something that you support?
Oh, most definitely. I think it's extremely critical. We need to make race at every single level of government. I think historically we have ignored it. And in order for us to really address these systemic racist decisions that have been made historically, intentionally by redlining communities and continue to not really address those issues, we really need to get to the core, to the root of of the problem. And in order for government to really get there, we need to have the tools to be able to do this. So for me, it's really critical that we are able to do the ability to do these types of conversations and this new way of engaging as an elected to make the decisions that we need to do. So it's a critical initiative that Dr. Shirley Weber is pushing forward, one that would be very transformative in how we start truly lifting our brown and black communities.
There's been some comments here from the public asking essentially when they might be able to, you might be able to consider implementing some of these ideas that you're now exploring through Councilwoman Monica Montgomery's budget request or IBA request to look into the SCPD budget for potential reductions, essentially realigning police. That IBA request, which you said earlier that you support as well, what is like a reasonable timeline that report could come back and that the city council could, depending on what it says and whether you can marshal the votes to support it, what would be a reasonable timeline to start implementing some of those changes? Because, you know, I think there's still, judging by the comments here, quite a bit of raw feeling that people felt ignored and that the process was over by the time they showed up.
Yeah, so I'll answer that, but let's talk about people feeling ignored, and let me tell you what Councilmember Montgomery and myself were doing the weekend leading to Monday. I spent literally Saturday, Sunday, Friday, and Thursday trying to figure out, is there a path? Well, what if we are to bring a change proposal to the PD budget? What would that look like? We couldn't get there. And it's not because we didn't try, but we just couldn't get there. There wasn't a straight path to say, okay, we're going to remove $10 million and it's going to come from this, because we needed more time. Like I said, this is a department that also is represented by labor. There's union outcomes, right? So it takes a lot of conversation. If we are to remove one department, if we are to remove the usage, the form on which they're engaging with protesters, gassing or using rubber bullets. Let's say that we say no more rubber bullets for the PD, right? What does that cost? I don't know what that cost would be, but that's taking something that they're allowed to utilize. Does that require a meet and confer? Possibly, yes. So the conversation was we just didn't have time to be able to do what we wanted to do. But we definitely looked at it because we knew the ask was coming. It was already preempted, so we knew it was coming. So we were looking. We spent the entire weekend with our staff, and they were combing through that. We just couldn't figure that out in that short period of time. So I really want people to understand that we did look at it to be able to have a response on Monday, but we just couldn't make it happen. And then there's the political aspect of it, right? Not all my council colleagues believe that we should do that. If we would have done that, I needed to make sure that I had my veto override, because also the mayor expressed that if we were to touch the budget on PD, he would have vetoed our budget. And I had that conversation with him, and he was pretty clear. So I knew that it was going to be vetoed. So I knew that I needed to have 6 council members to override that veto. I didn't have that. So my commitment to making sure that we are addressing racial disparities in this city, my commitment to equity, we needed to make a decision. So it was a hard one, but it was a decision that we needed to make. I'm not interested in making political, theoretical spectacles and say, hey, I'm just going to vote no and not really advance the conversation. By us creating the Office of Racial Equity, it's a significant thing for this particular conversation that I really don't want people to miss. It's really significant. By me moving some money to restructure on how we do homeless outreach to something like what PAC does, that is actually non-PD attached, that is social worker, is centered on the people outreach. That's pretty significant. The fact that we are addressing all these the little things that are impacting people ability to have access to better opportunities such as Wi-Fi access is pretty significant, that is going to impact some people in a major way. It not might not be that huge, but we were able to move the needle, and it's something that we're going to continue pushing. So I really want people to understand that we were not ignoring it. We really worked really hard in trying to figure out, okay, if we bring that change on Monday, what does it look like? We didn't know what that would look like. We couldn't get there. And then second, I knew that the mayor was going to veto it. That was no question. And we just didn't have the support. So we needed to figure out, okay, do we have the battle for the sake of having the battle? Or do we strategize, me and Monica, and trying to figure out what can we do now to plant that seed to continue moving forward? And that was what we decided to do because it's that important for us to really push, and we'll continue to do so. Now, going to the timeline, we just did the request. I communicated my request to the IBA yesterday. Monica did it the day before. We're talking to them. I don't know what the timeline is right now. The IBA has been working really hard. They're actually taking some time off right now. We're going to regroup next week to talk to them to figure out what that looks like and also create a timeline.
Would it be fair to say that mid-year revise would be the most likely first opportunity?
I would say so. I'm hoping sooner, because also one of the things that we've been discussing related to the budget is doing some sort of quarter budget, just because of the economic the crisis that we're in as well. So we have talked about that. I don't know if that's something that we're going to be doing. I'm hoping that we do. So it could be sooner. And if we do that, we're already prepping. I mean, the idea of us looking at the budget related to PD is to start really prepping to whenever that really happens. Whenever the door opens to the budget, we're going to be a little bit more. We're going to be ready to move it forward.
Okay, let's do a quick question here, and then I have a follow-up. One of your council colleagues. Well, actually, first of all, you did just kind of say something really interesting. There are 6 Democrat members on the city council, members of the Democratic Party. This was a supermajority. Everybody was on the left pretty excited about. But you said there you didn't have the votes to override the mayor's concern on protecting the police. Who wouldn't have been with you on that?
I just did the 6 votes.
Okay. Fascinating. All right, we have this question here. It says, I'd like to know the status and priorities of the negotiations for the next memorandum of understanding with the Police Officers Association, the Union of Police Officers. Is that deal now etched for a couple of years, or?
No, so right now the city is going through negotiations with all our 6 unions at the city of San Diego. We were going to do some increases, but because of the status of the economy, that got taken. What we decided to do is just do some healthcare flex proposal that is less than what anybody wanted, but that's the only agreement that we agreed upon. The POA, all the public safety unions have not agreed to that. MEA and ASME have agreed to it, so we already ratified a contract, and that contract is only for 1 year. So the contract will open up next year with the new council and the new mayor, and I don't know where they will take the negotiations, but as of right now, we have not come to an agreement with the POA, with the lifeguards and the firefighters. It's still pending.
Okay.
But the only contract that is being discussed is just 1 year, and the only thing that it has is healthcare benefits.
Okay, speaking of your council colleagues, you in the budget, even with this deficit, you put aside $15 million for rental assistance. A lot of us felt it was a little weird to say you can't get evicted, but you have to make up the difference when that eviction moratorium ends. I guess this is the response to that, at least to some extent. $15 million for rental assistance. But your colleague, Councilman Chris Ward, said We need to allocate more funding to rental assistance, small business assistance. We need federal dollars. I don't think we've gone far enough. This is not the right budget for District 3, and it did not earn my vote. Do you have a response for him?
I welcome my colleague to find a different path to identify more money. I think, was it the perfect budget? No, it wasn't. We can all say that we all wanted more things, but at the end of the day, we also have to find ways in which we spend, how we're going to pay for this, for whatever it is that we want to bring to the table. And he's got every right to say it wasn't perfect for my district, but at the same time, if he's proposing some changes, I mean, he could have proposed some PD cuts if that's what he wanted to do, but I don't remember hearing that from him when he suggested to amend the budget, which we ended up amending it based on his recommendations. So if he wants to bring additional changes, that's welcome. And that's welcome from any council member. I mean, the purpose of the hearing is for that. And I think there were two council members that made amendments actually, no, there were three that wanted to make amendments. It was Council President Pro Tempore, and I rejected her amendments. Councilmember Ward, there were only the only proposal that he suggested was adding more money to the rent relief and allocating it from a certain pot. So accepted that, and also swapping some staffing related to MEA and ASME, which I also accepted, and that was about it. There was nothing else. If he would have brought something else, maybe I would have accepted it, but that's all he discussed. And the other one was Councilmember Moreno, which I also accepted. So we have the opportunity. If he thought that we needed to go higher, he could have done that. We need to do the work as council members. I'm not a council member that likes to focus on the headlines that are going to be printed on any newscasts. We got to do the work to be able to do that change. Can the rental relief be higher? Yes, we will all want it to be higher, but where does it come from? So as leaders, we need to do a little bit of work to be able to do what we're asking the city to do.
I mean, you're saying there that his claim is kind of hollow. It's a hollow protest without that follow through.
Well, all I'm saying is that he's welcome to bring the suggestions, and I've not seen that. And that's something that is definitely available to any council member. So if he wants more money to the rental relief, which I can tell you that there's not a single council member that does not believe that it can go higher, but we just don't have the money. So yes, it should be higher because the need is there, but we're trying to figure out how to make all of it work.
Do you have a few more minutes? We have a ton of questions here. If you're up for it, we can get some of them.
I'm up for it.
All right.
Yeah.
We got this one from Christian Ramirez, a former city council candidate, says, why not reject Moreno's proposal for parking enforcement to the budget? I think that's what you were referencing. Was there a reason behind that?
No, that came, I heard about that amendment the day of, when we were actually in the middle of the hearing, and it was something that she wanted to bring forward. It was something that our unions asked me wanted as well, and on the spot I accepted them just because can it be different? Can it be more? I mean, the reason that our staff was proposing to reduce 2 staff people was because we're automating things, right? That we need less people on the ground. And I have mixed feelings about that. I think it's good to be upgrading our technology, but if it also means that we're replacing people with technology, I'm worried about that, just because what is that going to mean in the future with our workforce? So literally the reason that staff was proposing to cut these 2 positions was because of the automation of meters, that we need less people on the street. And that to me, the reason that I accepted it was because of that reason, because these are ASME, they're not PD, they're ASME employees, they're ASME leadership. It's on the traffic and in the traffic department that they're housed. And I just didn't want to start losing people because of automation. I think it's really critical for us to think about how we start transitioning and what that means to actual human beings.
Do you think there's a lot of questions here referencing Will Rodriguez Kennedy from the Democratic Party also made the same point that the strong mayor form of government is at the heart of the problem here. I've heard other frustrations, often from the elite side of things, thinking that the strong mayor form of government hasn't worked out. So just to be clear, the San Diego City Council used to hire a city manager. The mayor used to be a member of the city council. He would preside over the city's council. He would do your job and essentially set the agenda, things like that. In 2004, the city voted to move to a strong mayor, where the mayor would become the chief executive officer of the city, basically be in charge of almost all the city employees. And then the council would act as a sort of Congress on the side. And we called that strong mayor, but it was presented as strong mayor, strong council. Do you think fundamentally that form of government is flawed, and should we consider as a community a complete rehabilitation, sort of redesign of the system, go back to city council, city manager form of government?
Well, all I know is this form of government. I mean, obviously, I was around when we had that other form of government, but I wasn't decision making, so I couldn't tell you was that better as an elected than what it is now. I don't have that comparison. Am I ready to give up on the strong mayor, strong council? No, but what I am ready, and if I had more time, not in terms of my term, but it's just been a busy. I've been really busy. But one of the things that I really wanted to dig a little bit is what are the things that I can do as a council president to really lift up the importance of the strong council, and look at the charter to be able to have that ability to do that. Didn't really have the ability to do that just because of the timing. But I think there are opportunities to really enhance the strong council form of government along with the mayor, then create stronger checks and balances. I don't think we have that as much. You know what? I am definitely open and continuing. I have all the time that you want, but give me a second just because I need to plug in my computer or else it's going to go dark in a second. So hold for a sec. Sorry about that.
No problem. There was a question that came in about the height limit thing. I wanted to, there was a lot of discussion yesterday about ballot measures that were coming through. So just to set the scene for this one, the Midway area where the sports arena is west of the Interstate 5. And that means it's part of the city's coastal zone, which means it has a 30-foot height limit on construction. There was a ballot measure moved forward yesterday by the Rules Committee that would put that up for redesign. They would allow things to be built higher there. For instance, you couldn't reconstruct the sports arena at its current height there without getting a vote of the people because of that height limit. But there was a question that came in from DK. He asked if why you voted against advancing that height limit ballot measure for the sports arena Midway district. I just wanted to make sure there's a lot of questions here about a specific topic, but I wanted to make sure I got to that one. Why did you vote against that one?
Yeah, I'm supportive of the intent behind removing the height limit. What the problem is that right now the city of San Diego has an RFP for that area, a request for proposals from developers. As we speak, they actually closed this past Monday. And we did get responses to the request. But in that RFP, in that request for proposal, it states that if there are any developers that respond to our call for proposals that if they submit a proposal that is based on the 30 foot height limit, good for you, because those are the parameters right now. But if you respond with a project that is above that, then that, if they're in that respondent gets elected, they're responsible to go to the ballot and take this conversation about removing the 30-foot limit. They're responsible to do that. I have a philosophical problem with what we're doing right now, because if that is the case, and let's say that Keith has submitted his proposal, and his proposal is based on the higher height limit, then Keith should be working on getting that ballot into the voters. It shouldn't be the city of San Diego.
Okay.
And the fact of the matter is that we're doing that work. I'm supportive of it, but then we should be pausing that proposal as we speak right now. That is my issue with all of this. In terms of process, I don't feel comfortable in the way that we're going about it. And I'm calling the city to say, hey, we need to know that process right now. Let's finalize this conversation about the removal of the height limit or not, depending on what the outcome is, if it goes to the voters. And then we put out an RFP based on that. But right now, I feel like we're jumping ahead, and that does not feel ethical for me.
Interesting. There's a lot of people who want us to ask you this question. This is from Marco. We addressed it earlier, this idea of, did you do enough to acknowledge the people who called in that day? Why did you not tell the public your decision was already made on the budget, on the police issue and the police funding when they called in that day? And as we talked about earlier, you were talking about how, the process works, but I do think it might be worth explaining what was happening at that moment. What was the actual budget decision that you guys were making, and what had led up to it, and why listen to them that long without sort of telling them that it was kind of, I wouldn't say baked, but it was in place largely in its structure.
Well, I mean, I have to say that it was for the most part, it was done, because you can't just make. I mean, in order for us to make any decisions, any changes the day of, you got to remember there were some changes that were made the day of. But you also have to figure out how to, if you're adding something, you gotta, how are you paying for it, right? That's the homework that we need to do. There wasn't any council member that was precluded from making any changes to the PD department. We looked at it. I know that Monica and myself looked at it. We spent the weekend on trying to figure that out to bring that amendment, but we just couldn't figure that out, right? And I also, I don't know if anybody else did the outreach to the mayor, but I know that I did. I spoke with them and I said, hey, if there is a path in which we bring amendments to the PD budget, where would you be at? And it was pretty clear he was going to veto it. And then within that, then I have to make another calculation. Do I have the 6 votes to override that veto? That was not the case. Right, but does that preclude any other council members from making any changes? No, it doesn't. So, I mean, the changes that that Councilmember Moreno brought forward, that was the day of. I did not hear until literally a few minutes before we were in discussion that her proposal was going to be that, and how it was going to be addressed, right? Some of the changes that Councilmember Ward brought, I knew of them. Some of them I knew about it conceptually, but I didn't know how it was going to play out. So that was the day of. The things that we added, Monica and myself added in terms of the office, in terms of the community fund, in terms of the 1.5 for the non-PD outreach program to our unsheltered community members, that we were able to work during the weekend and trying to figure out, because it was major, it was more dollars to try to figure out how to reallocate it in various different ways. So we knew that was going to happen already, but outside of that, the other amendments, I did not know until the day of. So things can change, but once again, one has to do the work to be able to bring those changes forward.
I think we are going to wrap it up soon, but I think let's step a little bit back from that question. There's a lot of process involved in that, but what we're encountering are thousands, maybe hundreds of people who are newly interested in the budget, may not know the distinction between education systems versus city halls versus the county versus the state and federal government, may not know some of how to get involved in this process. You were once an activist. You were once one of the voices that showed up at city council. What would you tell them about this from a broader perspective rather than the budget process? You know, they're shocked. They watched this 12 hours of anger poured out and nothing happened as far as they're concerned. You know, what do you tell them to how to grapple with that? You probably had many of those moments in your own activist career, kind of surprised at how that went. How do you explain that and tell people to deal with that?
Well, I want to really encourage people to continue being engaged. The conversation's not done, and it won't be done. I mean, we're trying to figure out how to be responsive to what people are saying and genuinely responsive and not just, say, hey, I'm going to vote no, but I knew, that's not being responsive. So we're working, Monica and I are working really hard and making sure that we can land this conversation in a productive way. And we're doing the work to be able to do that right now. When that's going to happen, I can't tell you at this moment. It's pretty early, but we're trying to figure out, okay, where do we take this conversation and how do we take this conversation? How do we manage it in a way that is going to be productive and not just a screaming match type of thing? It's like if we're really serious about committed to make systemic change, then we got to be able to figure out how do we manage those conversations. So I really want to invite people to continue engaging because we will have a follow-up to this whole conversation about PD reform and transformation. That will happen sooner rather than later. And I'm trying to talk to my colleague, Monica Montgomery, to figure out what that looks like and when that looks like. I mean, we're bringing on board the Citizens Review Initiative, something that I've been supportive since day one. I've been working since day one when Monica came on board to make sure that we laid out a path to actually bring it forward to the council that's coming on June 23rd. That's a big thing that we were able to land to bring it forward for a decision. That's huge. And I want people to participate in that. There will be other reforms related to PD that will be brought to the committee. And their committee is going to start in July again. So I'm hoping that starting next month, we have a more robust, more active conversation related to accountability and transformation. And I really want to encourage people to really continue pushing forward. Change doesn't happen overnight. As a longtime advocate, I've learned that pretty quickly. And I was a member of the council. I can tell you that I understand what the challenges are. But we need to elect better people that are coming from the community that have that commitment, because we got to do the work. And I can tell you that me and Monica are doing the work. We'll continue to do the work. And this conversation is not done. So I really want to invite people to be part of those conversations.
Okay, one last one in.
Yeah, so the city council and the mayor's office had a debate all spring about what they could or could not use this $250 million that they received from the federal government in the CARES Act for. The federal government had a few different memos that it sent over outlining what was eligible spending and what was not eligible spending for that. The city council ultimately, or the mayor's office ultimately decided, and the city council went along with the idea to use it, including $42 million for the police department. That has been one of the many concerns that was raised by activists. A lot of the public commenters specifically took exception to that. And Alyssa Miller here asked, why did the mayor and city council think it was appropriate to allocate CARES Act funding to the police department? Was that something you considered reallocating in any way?
So when the only relief that we've gotten at the city level, my memo stated, give me 1 second.
Thank you for taking all these questions.
Yes, of course. My mouth is getting dry. So we gotta understand the context and this whole budget. When we started the budget conversations, we had a deficit, but the deficit was not to the extent that it climbed up to be. I think we were when we first saw the budget. I think we were looking at about a 50 million or so deficit. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember it, but it was about 50 to 70 or something like that. And then COVID came, and it changed the conversation of the budget in a significant way. We were looking at a deficit of about 300, if not plus, $1 million. How that trickled to the budget was major reductions to neighborhood services, such as closing the libraries 2 days, 2 full days, closing an entire public library in my district, cutting services for maintenance of our park and rec department, cutting some programming to the libraries, cutting programs to the rec centers, cutting our tree abatement. And these are little things that people don't get, right? But it's things that the council has been fighting to restore over the years. And I can tell you, since I've been in council, we've been fighting to restore all of that. So we were looking at terminating over 400 employees from the city of San Diego. That was pretty significant. And we fought really hard to make sure that that didn't happen. My direction and how this money should have been spent was to really plug the holes to try to prevent all of these different adjustments that were being proposed by the mayor, because that was going to be pretty significant. It was going to be a huge hit to our community in terms of just overall the neighborhood services that we provide. And a lot of the council felt like that's what we needed to do. Now, that's where we started. When we started these conversations, what we ended up with restoration of a lot of these different programs because of the way that we were able to manage that care money. Now, there's going to be a second wave coming. And how we spend that money, I think it's going to be very important. And that is the HEROES Act that is currently being discussed at the federal government, right? That will lead to more money coming to the local government. It's still to be discussed in terms of how much money, and still not yet adopted, but I have a feeling that it will come. And now the question is, what do we do with that money? And I'm trying to get ahead of that conversation, because that money should be for our community. It shouldn't be to uplift our departments. I think we're good now. We're good in where we are. So there are other needs that we have to also address, such as the impact to our unemployment, such as the rent relief, and making sure that people are not getting evicted. So for me, that money, I'm going to call out for that money to be placed in our community's hands, because I think that's an opportunity to do so.
Okay, I want to follow up real quick. The federal government's guidance on what was allowed to be used for CARES Act funding started out very vague, and it got a little bit more clear over time. One of the things that they called out specifically from the beginning and said you definitely can use this money for is police and first responders, and anything that they did that they wouldn't have normally done, that was done because of COVID-19. So it was specifically said you can use this for police funding. But there were other things that were itemized as well. They said you could create a grant program for small businesses to keep them from going out of business. Looking at that $42 million that went to police, did you ever consider whether that money would be better spent giving direct COVID-19 relief to, say, small businesses or anything else? I think the concern from the commenters on Monday night and right now is that essentially wasn't the best use for COVID-19 relief. How do you respond to that?
Well, my response is, could we have done better for a rent relief? Yeah, we can. Could we have been doing better to increase the amount to the small businesses? Yes, we can. But what does that mean? That meant that we would have had to really readjust the neighborhood services, which I think they're really vital and critical. So we needed to make that judgment and that management. So we were able to do both, right? It's not just about the money that was allocated to PD, because if we wouldn't have done that to PD, then that money comes from the general fund. If we were to reallocate that general fund money, then that comes from different programming that we're trying to restore. So we did the best that we could. Like I said, there's more money that hopefully will be coming, and that money should be reallocated to the community. At this moment, we were trying to plug holes, and there were some major holes in our budget that we needed to restore. And we're also trying to do as much as possible to support the community that is going through a tough time, that are not employed or they're not getting their unemployment because that's not they're still behind and whatnot. So we're trying to do as much as possible. And the fact of the matter is that we do have a rent relief program that is still yet to be in operating. It's not operating yet. We do have a bigger amount that was allocated for business relief. It just got adopted on Tuesday. We added $12 million, a little bit more than 12, but that's significant. And we're hoping to do more. But as things, we got to manage both, right? The operation side of the city, and then these different programs that because of COVID, we need to respond.
Well, that was a long and very good session. I want to thank everybody who asked questions. I tried to do my best to incorporate them. And also thank you, Council President Georgette Gómez. Appreciate you taking the time. Anybody can follow this thread. If you have other questions for Voice of San Diego or for the Council President, I'm sure we can highlight those and follow up. Andy and I do a politics report every Saturday. Andy, Sarah, and I here host the podcast. Comes out every Friday. And you can check out everything that we do at voiceofsandiego.org. Appreciate you checking that out and following up. Thank you again. And let us know if there's any of these future ones you want to see, what we could have been doing better, what we could do improve, and anybody else you'd like to put on the hot seat like this. And thanks again to everybody who came on. And stay tuned. We'll be back tomorrow with Voice of San Diego at home. And sign up on the podcast for any of that, wherever you get your podcasts. Voice of San Diego podcast is a good one to follow local politics. Thanks again, Councilwoman, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, talk to y'all. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Council President.